We are following some breaking news.
Julian Assange has agreed to a plea deal.
This is a very big deal and a very significant moment.
Yesterday, there was a huge development in the saga of Julian Assange, the founder of Wikileaks. After being held in a London prison for over 5 years, he's going to plead guilty to one charge of viewing classified documents and will, if approved by a judge, return home to Australia.
Lucy, I feel like there has just been so many twists and turns with the story of Julian Assange. There's been a number of movies made about this case, and I'm sure there's going to be another one now with what happened yesterday. It feels like yesterday's development is particularly significant. If we pretend I've never engaged with the Julian Assange story, give me some context as to who exactly we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this story has been going on for so long. I was in year 8 when Wikileaks first kind of came to the public's attention.
Yeah.
And obviously I'm a working journalist now, so it's been a long time. Julian Assange was born in Queensland in 1971. He worked as a computer programmer, and then he set up the website Wikileaks in 2006.
It's almost 20 years ago he set that up.
Yeah, that's wild. Wikileaks was designed to share censored materials involving, quote, war, spying and corruption with the public. It says it's published more than 10 million documents, and it was also launched at a very important time in history during the US-led wars in Iraq and Afghanistan following the 9/11 terrorist attacks.
So this Aussie computer programmer from Queensland suddenly becomes a really influential and controversial global figure. How did he get to that point?
Well, in 2010, Wikileaks posted thousands of classified documents relating to those wars in the Middle East that I mentioned, led by the US. One of those documents was a video from a US military helicopter showing more than a dozen Iraqi civilians and 2 Reuters news reporters being killed in Baghdad. And they called that video collateral murder. That's probably the one that you would have heard of if you're not that familiar with Wikileaks. These leaks also included claims that US armed forces were responsible for an estimated 15,000 unreported civilian deaths. And they also showed secret diplomatic, so country-to-country dealings between the US government and foreign leaders. Around this time, former US Army intelligence officer Chelsea Manning was found responsible for handing the information to Wikileaks, and she served jail time over her role in those leaks.
So Chelsea Manning goes to prison. Julian Assange, it's a little more complex there. Tell me about his time under the legal microscope.
In 2012, jumping forward, Ecuador's embassy in the UK, in London, provided Assange with political asylum, that's protection, which meant he couldn't be extradited to the US if spying charges were brought against him, as it was widely expected that they would be since he had facilitated the release of classified US military documents.
So basically, Assange is in London. He knows that the US wants him to be in the US so that he can face charges, and Ecuador's embassy agrees to almost protect him from that.
Yeah, what they said at the time was, quote, there are serious indications of retaliation that could endanger his safety, integrity, and even his life.
Okay, so basically the undertone there is that the concern was by extraditing Julian Assange to the US, his life was in danger.
Yes, and we'll get back to that later. At the time, though, basically, Julian Assange is living inside the Ecuadorian embassy in London. I feel like everyone would remember the pictures of him on the balcony of the embassy. That was basically his world for several years.
Okay, so he stayed in the Ecuadorian embassy. And what happened while he was in there?
He couldn't be extradited to the US. He also couldn't be extradited to Sweden to face rape charges that were raised in 2010. Those were later dropped by the Swedish authorities. But he was technically meant to be out on bail in the UK relating to those Swedish charges.
And so while he's in the embassy, the US is beginning to really build this legal case against him. They alleged that the documents that Assange's organisation leaked threatened its national security. Then they revoked his protection in 2019, right?
Yes, famously, he was basically dragged bodily out of the embassy by London police, and then he was jailed for avoiding bail on the Sweden charges. And it was also kind of considered to be on the behalf of the US that the UK police were arresting him. And he's been in a UK high security prison outside London ever since.
Okay, so we're now at 2019. He goes to a UK high security prison. I remember those photos super clearly. His whole body's almost off the ground. It was quite a striking image. The US still wanted him there so that they can put him on trial for these alleged crimes, right?
That's right. So since it announced these charges, the US has been asking the UK, let us take him, please. Facilitate his extradition, basically.
And what would happen if he was actually extradited to the US?
Nothing good is the thing. He faced 18 charges, which carried a penalty of up to 175 years.
Right.
And earlier this year, it became clear, basically for the first time, I think, that he was at risk of the death penalty if he was found guilty on these charges. And the UK courts asked the US to assure them that he wouldn't face the death penalty if he was brought over there, which they did eventually kind of, quote, provide assurances that that wouldn't be the case.
And it's been really interesting to watch Australia's role in all of these discussions as well. Australian politicians have been very involved. The tagline is bring Assange home and all those kind of things. The bit we're not talking about in these couple of years since April 2019 is the absolute multitude of trials, appeals, circuit courts, legal arguments that have been undergone by Assange's legal team. It's really tested almost areas of the law that people didn't really think existed.
Yeah, it's just too complicated to get into, right?
Yeah.
We'll just stay top level. But basically, yes, a series of appeals, a series of you have been granted the right to appeal. That right to appeal has been revoked. No, you have been granted that right to appeal.
Right.
As recently as last month when the UK High Court granted him leave to commence an appeal against being extradited to the US. So not even to the US charges, no findings on those US charges,
right.
Just specifically appealing the possibility that he could be sent overseas. And that brings us to this week.
Wow, so there's a bit of a scenic tour of the legal system there over the last couple of years. Then yesterday happens. It was about 9 o'clock Australia time.
Yes.
What did we learn?
Well, we learned that Julian Assange had agreed to a plea deal with US authorities that would mean he wouldn't have to be extradited to the US to face spying charges. Instead, he would plead guilty to one charge of accessing classified material that takes the place of all of the previous charges. And that meant that he was set to appear in court in the US. But where he's appearing in court is actually a US territory in the Northern Mariana Islands, which are about 2,000 k's east of the Philippines in the Pacific Ocean. There's a US court there because it's a US territory. I found this really interesting because this is basically as close to Australia as you can get while still being on US,
Right, interesting.
technically US soil. It's very far southwest of Hawaii. It's like the second closest US federal court to Australia. That tells me that everyone involved is very confident a judge will approve this and he'll be sent home to Australia.
Okay, so the US Justice Department and Julian Assange's legal team have reached this plea deal. It now heads to a US court in a tiny island in the middle of the Pacific. If that's approved, he'll head to Australia. Will he go into Australian prison once he arrives?
No, he basically will be a free man. And the reason for
Right.
this is that the one charge that he's pleading guilty to carries a sentence of about 5 years. And that is about as much time as he's spent in a UK prison. So they're calling that credit for time served.
And Lucy, have we had any reaction so far from Australian politicians who I know have been very involved in this international matter?
Politicians from across the political spectrum have spoken out about yesterday's developments. A spokesperson for PM Anthony Albanese told media the case had dragged on for too long, but the spokesperson didn't want to say anything else just in case Assange isn't actually allowed to come back to Australia. Nationals MP Barnaby Joyce, on the other end of the political spectrum, has actually been very vocal about this case for a long time, and he said this to Sky News yesterday.
It's an issue that goes beyond Mr. Assange. It's about extraterritoriality. It's about an issue about an Australian citizen who did not commit a crime in Australia, but had the prospect of going to the United States for a long period in jail.
Rounding out our whistle-stop tour of Canberra, Greens leader Adam Bant said on X that while it was great to see Assange possibly come home, quote, "This has been over a decade of his life wasted by US overreach. Pursuing Assange was anti-democratic, anti-press freedom, and the charges should have been dropped." Some pretty strong words, but I'd say I think that kind of summarises the mood of the country today.
An incredible development in this multi-year, almost multi-decade story. Thank you, Lucy, for taking us through that. And thank you for joining us on the Daily Aus this morning. If you learned something from today's episode, don't forget to hit subscribe. So there's a TDA episode waiting for you every weekday morning. If you're enjoying watching it on YouTube, you can also follow our channel to make sure something pops up when we upload a new episode. We'll be back again tomorrow. Until then, have a great day.